welcome to this episode of Empowered Entrepreneur. My guest today is Kelly. Hi, Kelly.
Hi, Vanessa.
So glad to have you on. Why don't you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself and then we'll get started.
Great. I'm Kelly Irene. I am an HR director and I'm also an entrepreneur. So I have found my space working with people who are, I like to call mystics and misfits. So people who kind of might find themselves out on the edges in one way or another.
That is perfect because topic today is imposter syndrome, and we both suffer from imposter syndrome. I don't know any female entrepreneurs that deep down don't feel that way. So let's get into the topic. How can
Awesome.
we love ourselves despite this?
I love that question. And I think there's so many elements to it. But for me, it really comes down to knowing myself so that I can love myself. And that's something that I work with a lot of my clients on. We have to know ourselves so that we know who it is or what it is that we're loving. And through whether it's through a podcast I've done in the past or through courses, everything is really centered on we have to know who we are so that we can fully love that person. And I'm happy if you want to dive into what that looks like, I'm happy to, but I also want to be sure I don't go off on a tangent at some point that we're not ready for.
Tangents are great. I have a blog post that I wrote many months ago that there are benefits to imposter syndrome because that gives us like a goal to get to. But how can we really mesh both of those ideas together?
I think that's a great point, and I honestly haven't thought of the benefits of imposter syndrome before. For me, the way that it initially showed up is I have this really clear memory of being early in my career, and I'm in my office building. We're on the sixth floor. We're downtown Louisville, Kentucky. It's my first like real job kind of a thing. And I'm looking in the mirror, and there's this woman that's got this incredible suit. Like I had gone to Nordstrom and bought this navy blue and cream suit, and I had this like navy blue blouse that had ruffles down the middle of it. And I looked so put together, but when I looked in the mirror and saw that person, I didn't recognize her. Like, there's no way that that could have been me. And when you just said, one of the benefits is imposter syndrome gives us something to aim for, it's like that's what I was aiming for, that kind of put together, organized, confident person. And I didn't feel that. And so it took me a long time to like get to that point where I did feel those things and where I could look in the mirror and think, oh, I know that amazing, gorgeous, confident woman. That's me. But it really, I think imposter syndrome, you're right. And I hadn't thought of it that way, but it really does give us that next thing to look forward to. And so I think not being afraid of it is probably how we bring the challenge of imposter syndrome with the benefits together, is not feeling like, okay, I don't recognize that person, therefore I can never be that person. That's where I think we can really go down like a trail that's not going to be helpful for us. So not being afraid of it and being willing to actually acknowledge that feeling and like give it space to live and breathe so that we can nurture it to become something else.
Just like we do for our clients. We nurture them, we care about them, we build relationships with them, but we forget about building that relationship with ourselves.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's so easy to just always be focused on the external, like what's happening outside of us and not what's happening within.
One of the things that I love to do for my imposter syndrome is look how far I've come. I remember just last year where I was like, I don't want to write a blog post every week. I don't want to do a podcast every week. I just want clients to come to me. But then I slowly was like, okay, they need to hear me. They need to know me. It's the easiest way to do that, blogging and podcast.
Yeah.
And then it was the social media of creating content and all that work and posting multiple times a day. And it can be exhausting. But if you take it in a project management perspective of like little tasks to build up that foundation, you can have a legacy in a short amount of time.
That's beautiful.
And I also have learned that having a cheerleader or life coach on your team helps with the imposter syndrome too.
Yes, that's a huge help. Yeah. It's interesting because it's with imposter syndrome, a lot of, when I think of what exactly imposter syndrome is, it's not being able to recognize our success. And so, we might be like in that position. I was an executive assistant. I was working with the CEO as part of a startup. And in a lot of ways, I was already successful, but I couldn't recognize that. And so being able to go, okay, here's the successes that I can recognize is a great way to not only approach imposter syndrome, but also give yourself that love for like, okay, pat on the back for what I have been doing.
Yes, and that's so crazy. I wasn't aware that you were an executive assistant at one point in time because
Hmm.
I too have over 20 years experience as an executive assistant.
Wow.
And it wasn't until one supervisor, one executive director had asked me to do a task. I had anticipated the task, done the task, and had the results ready for him when he asked for it. And that made me feel good that I knew what I was doing.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's not, I love the role of an executive assistant. I think it gives such great insight into the business world. And so I think people who've had that experience really have a different perspective on what it takes to create, run, manage a successful business that is hard to get elsewhere. Certainly possible, but it gives you a really unique perspective.
Yes, which I love having for my clients and a program that I created, which is a crash course on entrepreneurship.
Mm.
It's starting off with the right mindset of being an entrepreneur, knowing what you need to be resilient, and then it graduates into like the business innovation to developing a team.
Mm.
I have a team of 5 interns that I'm not paying.
Wow.
They're getting academic credit. So there are ways, even when you're just starting out, to build a team.
That's
And I
genius.
want
I
to,
hadn't thought of that.
I might have an extra one for you.
Okay. We definitely need to talk about this. I think that this needs to be its own course or like mini course, how to get interns for because it's so valuable for them to get to see what it's like on this side of business because it's being in the entrepreneurial space is vastly different from being with a established company or an established organization. It's so different.
It is very different. And I honestly attribute COVID to the rise in entrepreneurs
Mm.
because San Diego State University has a degree program to be an entrepreneur.
Oh, wow.
That's new.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really gets at just how widespread and honestly valid it is to be and to call yourself and to let yourself be an entrepreneur.
And even though we sometimes will need to make that strategic pivot into a other position to supplement income for whatever reason, that doesn't make us less of an entrepreneur.
Agreed.
And I feel like the imposter syndrome will rear its ugly head when that happens. But what do you suggest we do in that case?
I'm going to go back to know yourself. And the reason for this, and it really gets at kind of my journey of how I came from having that imposter syndrome, honestly feeling exhausted, feeling like no matter what I did, I wasn't doing enough or it wasn't good enough, feeling like I didn't belong in my own life because who am I to be, making these calls to a research scientist in India or the university director for something or, really that is an exhausting and lonely and discouraging place to live. And that is where imposter syndrome can come in so easily because it's added to that exhaustion. It adds to the discouragement. Like it's just this cycle. And when we begin to know ourselves and we begin to know, okay, and for me, it was through astrology, is how I really began to know myself. And so I began to see I'm a systems person. I love building systems, but not just any system. I need to be able to do it where I can see the impact that it has for the good of others, especially the marginalized. That's where that like mystics and misfits come in. And I have my two really personal values are authenticity, authentic living, and beauty. Those are things that are a must in everything I do. And so for me, when imposter syndrome was coming in full force, saying, you don't belong here. Who are you to be on the 6th floor of this office building? Who are you to be making those calls? Who are you to be starting this business? Who are you to be asking for this money or to be trying to get on this podcast or speak at this conference? I know who I am. I am damn good at systems. I value beauty and authenticity, and that's what I bring to every table I'm at. I can see those people on the margins and not just bring them in, but make the spaces broader so that they're already there where they are. And that's where I see it's not just saying, oh, imposter syndrome, you don't belong, or we don't have room for this in our lives. It's, yep, you can be here, but I'm still really firm in who I am. And that's how it's going to be dealt with versus trying to push it away, shun it, ignore it, pretend like it's not there, or shove it down. That never works.
Yeah. Self-doubt is so crippling.
It is. That is a great word for it, crippling, because it really is. It can be, yeah, it can really just stop us in our tracks where we've got motion, forward motion, and then all of a sudden we don't, and we don't even know like how to take that next step.
Yeah. And it can happen at any point in time. So you need to be aware of the energies that you interact with to remove those energies that make you feel self-doubt. Because if you're constantly doubting yourself, you're never going to really get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that thinking about actually that word crippling. I'm thinking of like, one, how would I feel if I were somebody who was disabled and, didn't have the use of my legs specifically or my arms, hearing that as like such a terrible thing. And so I always like to think like, how else can we phrase things? And I think that this also goes into imposter syndrome and self-love of even when maybe our legs aren't working the way that we thought that they would, or we're not able to make that forward motion in the way that we used to be able to, there's still another way. There's still going to be, maybe it's you have to develop new muscles to do that, or you have to develop new methods because whatever you were doing didn't work, or you need to rest and heal and allow some time to then be able to go back out and do that forward motion. Or maybe you need to be going sideways instead of forward. I don't know. But it's when we have something that happens and then we just see that as like the end all be all, there's a brick wall. It's like, well, where does that wall end? Can we find the end of it and go around it? Can we like jump over it or dig under it? Yeah.
And that's where the mindset of resilience and pivoting come in to an entrepreneur. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to be on a TED Talk yet. If you want to be on a TED Talk, you can be on a TED Talk. I don't want to be on a TED Talk yet. That might change in the future.
Yep. There's one of the very first books that I read that kind of sparked the journey for me where I'm at today is called The Universe Has Your Back by Gabrielle Bernstein. And she's written other books. I have this, anyway, I'm not going to go there because I think like I feel like she could feel controversial for people. I don't know. So I don't know her well enough to know like, okay, she's a great person to follow all the time. But this particular book, she talks about I'm ready to consider, or I'm open to be ready to something. So if we feel like I'm not ready for that big move yet, all right, I'm open to being ready, right? What can you do if you're out of red? If something's at a red, to just make it yellow, if that's your status color, right? Because you're not necessarily going to go from red to bright green, full steam ahead in one step. You've got to get from red stuck to yellow moving slow to then green, full steam ahead. And so maybe it's just, I'm open to being ready and allowing yourself to be open to it if you're not quite ready or feeling ready.
And that's a beautiful way to take in the imposter syndrome. If you feel like you're not ready, but you're doing the things, just be open to being ready.
I think that has, especially early on when I was founding Most True You, that was a big one for me because there were a lot of things I didn't feel ready for. I didn't feel ready to share my story. I didn't feel ready to, go public with what I'm doing, to tell my friends what I was doing, to create an Instagram account, to commit to whatever it was that I was doing. And so that was something that I held on to really closely was I'm open to being ready to start Most True You. I'm open to being ready to tell my friends. I'm open to being ready to, recognize myself as an authority in the space of authentic living. And it's that mindset really helped me to, one, give me the permission to feel the discomfort, but two, to not be stuck there.
Yeah, I started Mariposa Sources in 2019 without any idea of what it was going to be. I just knew that I wanted to start a business and be my own boss. So my
Mm,
first client was actually a bride, where I was a wedding planner and day of coordinator. Quickly realized that that's not what I wanted to do. And then COVID happened and I went to be a virtual assistant.
mm,
And it's grown since then as I've grown. And it's okay to just start without a plan and see what develops, because
yep.
that's your true nature,
Yeah.
what develops.
That's incredible. And I think that that doesn't get enough play time because that's so antithetical to the way that business is taught and to the way that business has been previously. And we're really coming into an age of people being a lot more mindful of their energy, a lot more mindful of the energies around them, a lot more cognizant of what it is that they actually want in their lives. And a 9 to 5 job just might not be that thing. And rather than just saying, well, that's the way it is, so I'm going to do it anyway, a lot of people are saying, no, I want to be my own boss, or I want to, in my case, I still work full time in human resources and I love it, but I need that creative outlet. I need that space of building community and helping others live authentically and, all of that. But it's not something that has to necessarily replace my 9 to 5 or my corporate job. They go hand in hand. And being able to recognize that just gives us that permission to say, okay, this is what I need. And so this is what I'm going to go for. And it is going to be one step at a time. And I don't know what my marketing plan is going to be a year from now. I don't know what my budget's going to be in 6 months because I'm taking it one step at a time. And there's a lot of freedom in
The freedom part,
Mhm.
even when you have imposter syndrome, the freedom part is a huge bonus. I think
Yeah.
that's what keeps entrepreneurs who have imposter syndrome going.
And I love tying this into self-love and just thinking when we can love ourselves enough to recognize what it is that we're longing for, when we can love ourselves enough to know what freedom might look like and feel like for us, and then love ourselves enough to take a step toward that, whatever that next step is, that's incredible. It's not easy to do that. It's in so many ways, I think we feel imposter syndrome in that because we hear all of these critical voices, whether it's from our culture, from society, from family, from, religion, or something a boss said to us sometime, whatever the source is, we have those voices that are saying, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Or something that's trying to hold us back from that forward motion that we want to make toward our goals. And so to love ourselves enough to, whether we're doing it with the voices still going or we found a way to silence them or at least turn them down, that's powerful. And I feel like there's so much magic in that.
I love that. And I was actually going to ask you if you had a final thought, but that seemed like a beautiful one.
I'm good with that being my final thought.
Well,
Oh,
thank you so much, Kelly, Irene.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Vanessa.
And in order to reach you, your links are in the show notes.
All right, perfect. Very good.